Hello. Welcome to our NASA Astrobiology Town Hall. I'm David Grinspoon, Senior Scientist for Astrobiology Strategy, and I'm here with Dr. Rachel Harris, NASA Postdoctoral Management Program Fellow. We'll introduce ourselves a little bit more in a minute, but the reason why we're here is to share with you more about our process for the new astrobiology strategy for the coming decade and beyond, which we're calling NASA DARES, which stands for NASA Decadal Astrobiology Research and Exploration Strategy. What we're going to do, just to give you the run of show now, we'll do some introductions, tell you a little bit about ourselves and what we're doing here. And then we'll spend about 25 minutes presenting to you our plan and our ideas for how this new strategy process will work, and most importantly, how you can get involved. This is meant to be a community exercise that will only work if we have your broad community involvement. So we're going to describe to you how we see that working, and then we will leave basically the last half hour for Q&A, and you can submit questions and upvote them at a website that you can access through this QR code that you see here on your screen. So please, we welcome your input and your questions, and we'll do our best to get to them. But I also want to stress that this whole session is being recorded and will be posted. And that's really important because we recognize that not everybody who wants to be involved and should be involved and is concerned and interested in this can be here today. For one thing, we know that there was rather short notice for this, and there are some reasons for that. We wanted to do it rather quickly while our RFI, our request for information, is out there now. So it was a balance between that and having adequate notice. But also at any given time, people may not be able to show up anyway. So for that reason, we will post this, and we will let you know how to get in touch with us to ask questions after this session so that we can continue the conversation and continue your input. And it's not limited to just this hour that you can ask or provide suggestions. So let's move on to the next slide. And we wanted to just introduce ourselves a little bit. I think some of you know me, but maybe some of you don't. I'm now Senior Scientist for Astrobiology Strategy. I won't read my whole abbreviated resume here, but I do have broad experience in a lot of job positions relevant to astrobiology. I've been a faculty member at CU Boulder. I've worked at both Southwest Research Institute and Planetary Science Institute as senior scientists, soft money researchers. I've been a museum curator of astrobiology at the Denver Museum. I was the first NASA Bloomberg Chair of Astrobiology at the Library of Congress. And I've taught astrobiology at 5 different universities. My own research has focused on evolution of planetary atmospheres and their relationship to habitability. And I've been on spacecraft teams for several missions for both NASA and ESA. When I'm not being a dedicated public servant, which admittedly is most of the time these days, I also enjoy music and small dogs who think they are large dogs. Now I'm very pleased to turn the mic over to my colleague, Rachel Harris, who will introduce herself, and then we'll start presenting NASA DARES to you. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Yeah, for everyone who doesn't know me, my name's Rachel Harris, and I am a NASA Postdoctoral Management Program Fellow at the Astrobiology Program at NASA headquarters. Just a little bit about my background. My background's in microbiology, where I studied at Wellesley College and also earned a degree in Russian. I did my PhD at Princeton University, investigating geomicrobiology, the deep biosphere, with Tele Sandstad. My first postdoc was in Peter Gergis's lab at Harvard University, focusing on habitability at hydrothermal vents and methane biogeochemistry. So my science has been very interdisciplinary over my career so far, and I've been very excited to and very thankful to be able to do astrobiology relevant research my whole career. And as David mentioned, when I get the chance to explore my personal hobbies at home, I bring my knowledge about biogeochemistry and environmental microbiology to hobbies such as gardening and home preserving, fermentation, and brewing. I'm also a big trivia buff. Love going to perform it or participate in trivia crawls at pubs, and I also love giant dogs who think they're small dogs. So, just to give a little bit of background before we really dive into the RFI, David and I wanted to provide some clarification about the difference between NASA internal documents and external assessments, such as National Academy studies. So very quickly, we want to give a brief history of the 3 NASA astrobiology strategies, including this upcoming one. The first one was the Astrobiology Roadmap that was published in 2008. And it's focused on 3 core questions. How does life begin and evolve? Does life exist elsewhere? And what is the future of life on Earth and beyond? There were 7 science goals that were outlined within this document that was mostly had an emphasis on solar system astrobiology. And, that makes sense because at the time we didn't have as much information about extrasolar systems. And so exoplanets were not as big of an emphasis at the time. But there was still also, this focus on multidisciplinarity of astrobiology, the importance of planetary protection, and ensuring that there's a lot of education and public outreach of astrobiology. The 2015 strategy, which was led by Dr. Lindsay Hayes when she was an NPMP at headquarters, builds off of the 2008 roadmap. And it identified 6 major science goals, which have essentially translated into what are now the research coordination networks in the astrobiology program. It built on the premise of the 2008 roadmap by incorporating new research ideas such as exoplanet habitability, understanding extremophiles and the limits of life, incorporating advancements in omics such as metagenomics and metatranscriptomics. And it also had a stronger emphasis on technology development to support astrobiology in missions. And so with this new strategy that we're developing at NASA, it will be building off of the goals and principles of the 2015 strategy, while also updating the science to reflect how far we've come and where we're going in the next decade. And so it's going to be expanding this interdisciplinary focus and really try to formalize a cross-divisional, even cross-directorate relationship at NASA where astrobiology has its relevance. And it's also going to be having a longer-term vision. So even though it'll be a decadal strategy, it's going to be looking forward beyond to think about where astrobiology is going to be going in the next decade and beyond. NASA strategies, by comparison to the National Academies of Sciences and Engineering and Medicine reports. So here on the left, we have, apologies. So NASA strategies outline NASA's own research goals and priorities and planning needs. They directly support NASA's science programs and missions, and they're used internally within NASA to shape programmatic decisions. So, for example, when our program officers are looking over research proposals, they are referencing the 2015 astrobiology strategy to make sure that their research portfolio is comprehensive and reflective of NASA's programmatic priorities. The National Academies reports, by comparison, they may be issued or commissioned by NASA or other federal agencies, but they're independent assessments by subject matter experts. And so they are considered objective reviews of the state of the field with recommendations that are relevant to multiple sectors, not just NASA, but other federal agencies, universities, research institutions, et cetera. They provide community-driven consensus guidance with an emphasis that it provides recommendations, but not advice. And that is because these are reports that must be compliant with what's known as the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA. And so they are allowed to provide guidance to federal agencies, but they cannot provide formal advice. And so in that regard, they are not prescriptive to NASA, but NASA will respond to them and, reply to their recommendations, and it will ultimately inform its planning. And so all of these strategies and decadal documents that are published by the national academies are all complementary to each other. So the 2008 roadmap was referenced in decadal surveys that were published in between 2008 and 2015, which were referenced by the 2015 NASA strategy, which were referenced by decadal studies or decadal surveys and other consensus study reports published between 2015 and now. And so in the same way, this leapfrogging and building off of each other is going to be happening in the new NASA DARE strategies. And so NASA takes these broad recommendations that come from these decadal surveys and consensus study reports and translates them into focused research and exploration goals that are tailored to NASA's missions and unique programmatic needs. And so, just to kind of give you a sense of this cadence and cyclicity continues, while this new decadal strategy at NASA is underway, additional National Academy studies are in progress or are being planned or even not yet commissioned that will have relevance to this document and the future of astrobiology. So these strategies and independent assessments are complementary and will continue to follow a regular cadence to ensure, healthy communication and feedback between, agencies and communities that, do research for them. David, this is
thanks, Rachel. I wanted to, at this point, just talk a little bit about the landscape of astrobiology at NASA and how it has shifted and is shifting somewhat, and how that figures into the perspective that we're bringing to this new strategy exercise. NASA Science Mission Directorate is divided into 5 different divisions: heliophysics, earth science, planetary science, astrophysics, and BPS, biological and physical sciences. And historically, of course, astrobiology comes out of planetary science. There are reasons for that. We first really needed exobiology when we started exploring the planets and wondering about this question of both planetary protection and possible life detection. And that, as the exobiology came out of planetary science and eventually became astrobiology. Excuse me. It's a history I think most of you know. But more recently, astrobiology's role has expanded beyond planetary science in a lot of ways, and in a way that is continuing. And some of this has to do with important scientific developments. When astrobiology started, as Rachel mentioned, exoplanets were not even very much on the radar. Now they're, of course, really important to astrobiology. And so the interactions with astrophysics, of course, are key, especially in the era now when we're starting to design a habitable worlds observatory, which right in the name suggests that it's largely an astrobiology instrument, but it's not housed in the planetary science division. Likewise, now that we have Europa Clipper on its way to Europa, it's very clear that the interactions with the Earth Science Division in the area of ocean worlds is essential. And I'm not going to list every good example here, but heliophysics has a program where they support studies of atmospheric loss and habitability in the presence of a star. So in the slightly over a year that I've been senior scientist for astrobiology strategy, I've been looking at these connections with beyond the planetary science division, the connection with other science divisions in the Science Mission Directorate a lot. and working with people in these divisions to explore and cement these connections and see how we can expand and improve our cooperation across SMD. And there's a lot of interest in these other divisions in sort of regularizing and expanding their connections to astrobiology. So part of what I've done recently is establish a group at NASA, a new working group called the Astrobiology Federation. Oh, before I get to that, I also wanted to mention that that in addition to the Science Mission Directorate, astrobiology is expanding to other directorates at NASA. Most importantly, as you can see here over on the right, the exploration side of NASA, the human exploration side of NASA. Now that, for instance, people we're preparing to send people to Mars, that brings in astrobiology in a couple of important ways. One is what science needs to be done before humans go to Mars to ensure that we have the proper baselines and so forth. You know, there's some astrobiology that's motivated by the impending arrival of humans at Mars. And then, of course, when humans go to Mars and are doing science there, well, we expect astrobiology to be central to what humans are doing on Mars. So for both those reasons, the Exploration Science Strategy and Integration Office, or SEO, is really important now as a part of astrobiology. Likewise, what we call OIIR, the Office of International and Interagency Relations, enters in because there are important astrobiology activities that involve cooperation with other agencies, National Science Foundation, and others, and as well international connections. And so we intend for those to be part of the strategy as well. So that those are some ways in which other that we go beyond just the Science Mission Directorate at NASA. Now, in order to improve the communication with these other parts of NASA, we've recently established a group called the Astrobiology Federation. This is brand new, and it's meant to be a kind of standing committee to represent the interest in astrobiology across these disparate parts of NASA. And this is largely motivated because since I've been at NASA in the last year, I've been having a lot of conversations with the separate different science mission, the science divisions, and they've been fruitful. And we've been able to start some new programs and imagine other programs and cement existing programs. But it's been a lot of sort of one-on-one bilateral meetings. And I realized that this broad interest in astrobiology might be better served by a group representing all of these parts of the Science Mission Directorate that can come together. So it's not just me talking to them, but them talking to each other. So we've got a brand new group called the Astrobiology Federation that will provide guidance in this sort of Science Mission Directorate wide and beyond treatment of astrobiology at NASA. And as you can see here, I'm not going to go through all the fine people that are part of this because we don't have that much time. But in addition to planetary science, we have astrophysics and heliophysics and biological science represented here. And we've got Kenda Lynch from SEO, the Exploration Science Strategy Integration Office, who will help us make sure that we're representing the astrobiology interest in human exploration properly. We have great input from astrophysics. So I'm excited about this group for a number of reasons, but pertinent to our presentation and our discussion this afternoon, the Astrobiology Federation will also help to provide guidance for this NASA DARES process and ensure that the communities for all of these disparate parts of the NASA science, wider NASA science community that we want to involve in this process are properly represented. So I just wanted to introduce the Astrobiology Federation to you. And now I'm going to turn the mic back over to Rachel, who'll talk a little bit more about the process that we have in mind.
Thanks, David. And yeah, so since David mentioned, there are some changes that are undergoing astrobiology at NASA. This means that the time is right for NASA to seek you, the community, your input on the development of the next astrobiology strategy for NASA. And so this is topic of today's discussion, this request for information, which is the development of NASA DARES, the Decadal Astrobiology Research and Exploration Strategy. So this was published on Inspires on October 8th, and the solicitation number is listed up here, as well as a QR code and a short URL that will bring you to the strategy page. This is meant to be a short, easy exercise. You have 5 pages maximum, including references. We recognize that someone sent us a message saying that there was a typo in the RFI, that there was a bit of a lack of clarity about whether or not this is 3 pages or 5 pages. And so we just want to acknowledge that was a small typo. The correct answer is 5 pages maximum, including references. With that, there will also be some program-specific questions in which we're asking you to identify the one primary topic that your RFI response is relevant to, as well as up to 3 secondary topics. There's no limit to the number of individual responses, regardless of your authorship status, and you have until February 4th, 2025 to submit. And so questions about the RFI can be emailed to the email that's listed at the bottom of this slide, and we'll also have it up at the end of today's presentation if you have questions. The requested response topics are as follow. There are 9 of them. Review recent advancements, identify emerging themes and technologies, fostering cross-divisional and cross-directorate collaboration, incorporating and synthesizing recent recommendations, strengthening community, evaluating astrobiology's role and missions, astrobiology in human space exploration, preparing for the discovery of life beyond Earth and subsequent post-discovery activities, and then finally, additional or other relevant topics that might not have been included in the 8 listed previously. And so in terms of what review recent advancements means, that's looking at how far we've come in the last decade since 2015. And so, in that time, we've just launched Europa Clipper successfully from Florida, and it's on its way to the Jovian system to explore, potential biosignatures at Europa. We've found intriguing rocks on Mars with the Perseverance rover that have been collected for Mars sample return. We have also returned samples from the asteroid Bennu via the OSIRIS-REx mission, including, the first discoveries coming from it of sodium magnesium phosphates that may indicate that Bennu may have broken off of a primordial ocean world. We have confirmation of the Dragonfly mission. We have over 5,000 exoplanets that have been discovered, including potential exo-Earths, such as the TRAPPIST-1 system. The James Webb Telescope is now fully online and operational and giving us higher resolution of the cosmos than we've ever had before. And then we've also had significant advancements in space biology in support of human spaceflight and supporting extended human, presence in space and for space travel. So ranging from being able to grow food to understanding the effects of space on, our own gene regulation and safety. In terms of the second topic, identifying emerging themes and technologies, this is just a small spattering, but small satellites are coming online. AI and, large language learning models, machine learning and astrobiology is going to be especially relevant in the next decade. That was not foreseen in the previous. New communities that are coalescing, looking at, the search for life in the form of technosignatures. And this is something that NASA's supported in the past for workshops. So, this is not an exhaustive list, but just an example. Fostering cross-divisional and cross-directorate collaboration. It's been a long-standing goal of the astrobiology strategy to increase collaboration across traditionally different divisions and directorates at NASA. That's kind of been baked into some long-standing bureaucratic policies. But as David mentioned, we have the Astrobiology Federation coming online to lay the foundation to bridge that gap. And so that is allowing us to draw concrete connections between programs, such as those in earth science, understanding the changes in climate, or deep ocean research on the habitability of ocean worlds, understanding how astrobiology can be used to support long-term human presence in space, how the effects of space weather might impact habitability, or how stellar evolution might impact habitability over time. The Habitable Worlds Observatory is coming online in astrophysics, which is going to be searching for evidence of habitable exoplanets. And part of that is to be, looking for evidence of biosignatures or even technosignatures. And then finally extending beyond the Science Mission Directorate into ESD&D and SEO, with human spaceflight programs and the Moon to Mars objectives, thinking about how astrobiology can not only support human exploration, but also the astrobiology that humans will do when they go to these other bodies. The fourth one is incorporating and synthesizing recent recommendations. So we've made a huge amount of progress in the last decade, identifying how far the community has come. And so it's time to distill that down into, concrete focused plans for the NASA Astrobiology strategy. And so this is particularly relevant to the communities that are here today. You may be asking yourself, what if I already wrote and submitted a white paper for one of these, NASEM studies? Do I need to submit the same paper again in order for it to be incorporated into NASA DARES? And our response to that is, if your ideas made it into OWL that you proposed in your white paper, then you can assume that it is foundational for NASA DARES. So if you would like a strategy that elaborates more on that content with more specific ideas for implementation or research emphasis, we suggest you, refer to your white paper and OWL specifically, but then expand and refine on them for submission to this RFI for DARES. 5 is strengthening communities. So, we have the RCNs that are online now, and they're supporting a wide variety of science activities and research that are already cross-divisional. But the question is, do we need to do more? Do we need to, create additional RCNs with new communities that are getting more attention? And so this is an opportunity to give your feedback on that. Evaluating astrobiology's roles and missions. This is expanding on 2015 recommendations about increasing tech involvement or tech development for astrobiology missions. We already have what we would call our astrobiology mission fleet, with a list of missions, both, happening right now and those that have been planned that have astrobiology science objectives, and as well as recent decadal recommendations from decadal surveys suggesting future missions. And then also kind of baked into this is also planetary protection and the role that astrobiology plays in understanding, for example, the limits of habitability and how that influences our clean room processes and managing microbial payloads. Topic 7 is astrobiology in human space exploration. So as I mentioned, this is relevant to asking questions about what is the astrobiology science that we want to perform before we send humans to other bodies. What is the science that can support human habitation long-term in space? And then finally, what is the astrobiology science that astronauts can do on other bodies? So this is incredibly relevant for the Artemis program and the Moon to Mars architecture. And then topic 8 is preparing for the discovery of life beyond Earth and subsequent post-discovery activities. So there's been a lot of work in recent years that have tried to identify or I guess formalize, the what's called like the ladder for life detection, and making sure that if we find the evidence of potential biosignatures, how do we vet them and how do we make sure that they are reproducible and acceptable by the scientific community? And so, that is manifesting into NASA commissioned groups such as the Search for Life Science Analysis Group, which is coming together based off of decadal recommendations to support a Mars life detection mission, such as Emily. But all of this is still very much relevant to the question of life detection. Not so much work or headway has been made with respect to what are the activities that happen when and if we discover life in the universe. And so there's quite a bit of work to be done here talking about engagement with the public, how our science is going to change, and what are the societal implications going to be of all of this. And then finally, understanding we're not comprehensive and you may have some great ideas that don't really fit in well with any of these 8 topics. We give space for you to provide that as well. So we welcome those recommendations. And so to just clarify, this RFI is an initial step in a multi-phase approach to shape the new strategy. It's a tool to gather your input, and it's designed to stimulate ideas and identify key areas of interest to these RFI topics. It's going to be part of a larger process in the coming year that will include workshops, town halls, task forces, and many opportunities for community feedback and engagement. And again, it's not the sole input to NASA DARES, and it's not going to be the final or comprehensive document. There are many opportunities ahead. This is the starting point. And so just to kind of give you a preview of coming attractions, what you can expect after the RFI deadline passes, NASA is planning to collaborate with a coordination group of community-selected subject matter experts to process RFI responses. We're calling this notionally Task Force 1. So we imagine this to be, leadership from RCNs and other relevant groups, but anyone is encouraged to apply. This will be mostly administrative. So we will be processing the RFI responses, organizing them, identifying major themes, and presenting them at a workshop to the community for feedback in 2025. And so we will be soliciting nominations for that task force via the NASA Panel Reviewer Program. And so stay tuned for a forthcoming announcement about that opportunity. And then looking ahead to next year, early 2025, we'll open registration for this RFI findings workshop in the spring. We're also going to have a call for nominations for a second coordination group, which we're calling Task Force 2. This will probably be via Dear Colleague letter on Inspires. So the same platform in which the RFI is currently listed. This is the bulk writing group. And so this will be responsible for expanding and refining RFI findings into cohesive, detailed chapters for NASA DARES. You're going to be presenting findings for community feedback and input throughout topical workshops throughout 2025. And you're going to liaise with the Astrobiology Federation at NASA for critical review and compliance. And so we'll announce those participants in spring 2025. And for both Task Force 1 and Task Force 2, you'll be onboarded through NRES, and non-civil servants will receive a modest honoraria. So relevant announcements will be shared on the Astrobiology Strategy website and the Astrobiology mailing list. So links to those are on this page, so feel free to sign up there. And then in terms of who can apply specifically to Task Force 2, the major writing group, we're not going to go into the details today on that because the terms of reference are still in development, but we're essentially envisioning this to mimic or mirror a large Frontiers class mission organizational structure. So that's going to have multiple roles in a hierarchical structure, commensurate with experience, expertise, and availability. So there will be opportunities for students and postdocs looking to build experience and contribute new ideas, mid-career researchers who might be balancing heavy workloads but want to have avenues to provide meaningful feedback, senior emeritus faculty who want to leave a lasting impact and leave a legacy, and specialists all around. So additional details will be forthcoming, so stay tuned for that. And then, this is just a notional timeline of all of the activities. So you'll see where we are here today in November. The RFI is open, and you have until February 4th to submit. And so we're just in phase 1 right now. So there's a total of 4 phases. And, the opportunities for the 2 task forces are going to be online and available in the coming months. So right now, notionally, the plan is to have a draft of the new strategy available for community feedback for presentation at AGU 2025. But we've baked in some flexibility in the timeline to accommodate potential delays. But we're hoping to have this unveiled and fully polished in 2026. And so I realize I'm just slightly over time. And so I want to make sure that we have time to go over the questions that have been submitted by our community. But first, I just want to thank everyone for their engagement and their time today.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rachel, for all that. And before we're going to get to questions now, but I want to stress again that this session is being recorded and will be put online, and including the responses to questions. And so anybody that was not able to participate today, we welcome your questions and involvement in the future, and we will let you know also. Well, actually, right here on this slide, you can see there's an email address where it says questions, comments, and that goes directly to a box that Rachel and I have access to that for email relevant to this process. And so we want to continue the conversation beyond just this session. And that's especially let people know who are concerned, who were not able to join us today. So let's go right to the questions. And we'll sort of start at the top, but if there's redundancy, we may skip around a little bit. But so we have, why isn't this decadal document being prepared through the usual National Academy's decadal process? The top answer to that is that this is not a National Academy's decadal report. And as Rachel described, this strategy document. This is actually being done through the usual NASA strategy process, and this is continuing something that we've done roughly at a decadal pace, which is at a different cadence, it is interwoven with the National Academy's process, and provides a somewhat different function, fills a different role, but it's very complementary to that process. So they are moving on to the next question, unless, Rachel, do you have more to add there? Because the next question sort of follows on this one.
No, I mean, I think that the only thing that I would add is that, the usual decadal process for astrobiology, there's only been one, which was the 2019 NASEM study, the, search for astrobiology science strategy for the search for life in the universe. So there isn't a usual strategy through the National Academies for in that case. And so just to kind of reemphasize again that there is the National Academies, which are independent assessments that have kind of broad scope that NASA and other agencies respond to in the form of the quick responses. So you'll see that, for example, NASA's response to the Planetary Science Decadal OWL, or the MSR Independent Review Board, and then following that, the internal strategy documents, which manifest the internal programmatic changes that are emphasizing a focus on the priorities and program needs for the agency itself. And I guess great. the other final thing that I'll say about it is that the NASA has to have its own internal strategy documents because it has to have its own internal guidance. Otherwise, it would run afoul of FACO, which is the Federal Advisory Committees Act. And so we developed this means of being able to get broad community feedback and recommendations through the independent academy studies, and then forming the NASA-specific, agency-specific reports. And so the way that we're accomplishing it this time is through the oversight of the Astrobiology Federation as an advisory council.
Yeah, that's great. And it really feeds into the next question, which is how is DARES different from the 2023 to 2032 Decadal Survey for Planetary Science and Astrobiology? I'm really glad people are asking these questions because it's great for us to have an opportunity to really make sure that the community understands what this is and why we're doing it and how it fits into other community efforts. And so how is it different? The OWL, Origins, Worlds, and Life, which is Decadal Survey for Planetary Science and Astrobiology, there are a few differences. One is that is focused much more on planetary science exploration and research. And as we've indicated, there are increasingly areas of astrobiology which go beyond the planetary science division at NASA, and we really want to capture that. But also, this exercise is going to be much more granular because it focuses entirely on astrobiology strategy. One way to look at is that OWL Decadal, which is absolutely foundational to what we're doing here, and that we want to stress that again. We're not going to question or try to overrule or relitigate anything. We are accepting the recommendations of OWL as the scaffolding. But I think that's a good analogy. We can think of that as the scaffolding, and we're going to be filling in some of the bricks. It's going to be much more detailed about within the broad confines of the priorities set by OWL. What are the actual details of research and exploration strategies that astrobiology should and could pursue as we go forward into the next decade and beyond. Rachel, do you have anything to add there?
No, I don't have anything to add to that, David. I think that we've covered this pretty exhaustively, and I just want to make sure that we have time for the other questions. And so I think I'm going to skip over the next one. So I think we've kind of covered it between our presentation here and our responses so far, and move on to some others if that's all right. So the next question is, why is the NASA DARES community input period so short? And I can take a stab at that. So again, just to reiterate, this is a 120-day window for RFI responses, but it is not the only community input period. This is the first phase in a multi-phase process that will be by the community for the community. And so this is, just the initial step. And so while your input is very important at this time, it is not your only opportunity to provide feedback. And so, again, serving on these task forces, participating in the community workshops in the coming year are all going to be part and parcel of developing this new strategy.
Yeah, and it's kind of a balance. We wanted to give people enough time, but we also wanted to leave a lot of time for the later steps, because the RFI this is really just our initial gathering of ideas. It's sort of, we intended as a collective brainstorming effort by the community writ large of astrobiology, and it could be longer, but if we made it 6 months, that would mean we had less time for the workshops and the writing and the other important activities we want to do in response to this. And so actually initially we had it at 90 days, and we bounced that off of the RCN leadership and got the feedback that it was too short. So we extended it to 120 days, and that seems like a good balance between these sort of competing factors. But the other thing I think we should stress is that we really don't want this to be an onerous exercise on anyone. It's not drop what you're doing and write a 5-page polished paper. These can be fairly informal. This is an information gathering exercise. They're not going to be graded on how well written they are or how polished or how well referenced. If you have an idea that you want that you think is worthy of being included in this strategy exercise, you can write a 2-pager for us. And it doesn't even have to be that well written. Again, you're not going to get a grade. And these, don't have to be, it's up to your discretion whether you want to let us put this in an appendix of the document if it ends up getting used, or if you would prefer that we just register your ideas. So there's a wide latitude in how much time you can put into this, but it's really much more about getting your ideas into the mix than writing something that is a totally polished and finished publishable paper. So hopefully, given that guidance, if you've got an idea that you feel ought to be included in this, that within that 120 days, you'll be able to get us something.
Yeah, and I think that there are a few related questions that I think that we can kind of cover, very quickly related to that. So, David had just mentioned that, these don't need to be polished, perfect white papers. I think that there are a couple of questions that were submitted by the community that are within scope of that topic. So, related to that, there was a question about, can I submit an RFI response in whole or in part to a journal? From a NASA perspective, there's no conflict from us. You're welcome to submit your RFI responses wherever you would like. That being said, individual journals might have their own submission policy requirements. And so you might want to reach out to an editorial team there to ask them, what they define as previously published elsewhere. But, related to that, that's why it's, there was another question as well about, will the names of submitters and co-signers to this RFI, be linked as the process moves forward? And as we outlined in the RFI summary, and we'll reiterate here again, we will not share the names of RFI authors unless we get your permission. And so that includes, sharing summaries at community workshops, draft findings, the formal strategy itself. And so a good, example of this previous question of, can I submit to a journal? If you reach out to a journal and they say, well, if it's in the appendix of a NASA strategy document, then that's considered published elsewhere, then it may be in your best interest to say, no, actually don't name me as, an author and don't reference my white paper directly, but I would like the ideas to be incorporated into the NASA strategy. So we want to make sure that we give you credit where credit is due, but also we don't want to create any additional conflicts for you. So we can work with you on that. I think also related to that, there's some questions about whether or not students can submit and lead white papers. The answer is a resounding yes. The work that is, being proposed or that's been accomplished in the last decade, was all based off of the guidance of the 2015 strategy. I was a student at the time. And so, a lot of my work has very much been based on the guidance on the 2015 strategy. So in the very much the same way, if you have a really great idea that you want to bring to the table, you are absolutely welcome to do that. You guys are the future of astrobiology and astrobiology leadership. And so it absolutely is relevant to contribute to a document that's going to be relevant over the course of your career.
Okay,
David,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What is the role and purview of the coordination group? And will there be an opportunity to apply for a coordination group role? Well, I think Rachel covered that more or less in the presentation, but just maybe we can reiterate. So there are two different coordination groups, and the first one is the role is largely sort of looking over the RFIs, collating them, identifying, the white papers, the input from the RFI, identifying major themes, using that as the basis to design the first workshop, to pick topics that seem to kind of rise to the top through that process. And then the second group will be more in-depth with the results from the initial, the workshop exercises will be actually doing the writing of the document. So they're somewhat different roles, and there will be opportunities to apply. The first group is going to be largely done by the RCNs, but there's opportunities for other people to get involved as well. And the second group, there will be a mechanism to apply, and that will draw more broadly from the community, or I should say the communities involved in providing input to this. Do you want to say more about that, Rachel?
The only other thing that I'll mention is, because it's relevant to a few questions that have been asked, is about compensation. And for both Task Force 1 and Task Force 2, we are going to be onboarding you through NRES, and so you will have a contract. And so there is room for honoraria for non-civil servants. We've been asked before, and there might be a question as well in the chat about whether or not international participation can, be supported. And our answer for that is yes, we can support international participation, but in terms of the way that their contracts work, we have to have an affiliation with a U.S. institution, and by extension, a U.S. bank account to deposit honoraria into. And so if you have any more specific questions, you can reach out to us or our RNA leads who can help provide some clarity for that. But any foreign nationals who are on visas working in the U.S. are absolutely welcome to apply. There's no conflicts there. So that's not an issue. Yeah, and I guess the other thing that I'll say is, again, the terms of reference is being written up right now and going through editing and review with the Astrobiology Federation for the 2 task forces. And so that effort, as soon as that gets approved internally at NASA, we'll be able to release the calls for the 2 task forces. So stay tuned for that information. Let's see, are there any other relevant questions kind of on this topic? Or I think we kind of covered it pretty comprehensively.
There are 2 questions, the next one and then one that's 3 down about undergraduates participating. Is there a way that I as an undergraduate can contribute? And with these strategies, what is the best way undergraduates can prepare for the future of research? So just quickly, yes, undergraduates, there's no reason why you can't write a white paper if you're an undergraduate and you're motivated. We're interested in your ideas. After all, you students, both graduates and undergraduates, you're the future of this field that this will be relevant to. As far as undergraduates preparing for the future, that's a little bit out of scope for this meeting, but it's a great question. Stay in school, do your homework, study hard. No, I mean, really, there's so much opportunity. There are all kinds of summer internships. And, if you go to actually our astrobiology website, there's a whole section on student opportunities. And please check it out because there are a lot of really cool internships and summer schools and various opportunities for undergraduates. So we definitely want your involvement. Let's see. I think there's
a related question here about, involvement with artists. So the question is there some way you can open up RFPs to artists as well? Exploration and discovery is nonlinear. It's important to include them in the process, which should inspire and broaden the honesty of the scientific process. I think that's very well said. I just want to clarify, this is not an RFP. It's not a request for proposal. It's just an RFI, request for information. But I do think that a very big aspect of the future of astrobiology is communicating astrobiology, and pictures are worth 1,000 words. And us at NASA, we're very thankful for our graphic artists to be able to share our science. And so that's something that's absolutely relevant to the future of astrobiology. So in that regard, yes, your contributions are, very much encouraged. So please feel free to submit an RFI.
Yeah. And by the way, on the clock, we only have 5 minutes left, but we can go over. We can easily go, 10, 15 minutes over because there's a lot of good questions here and we want to make sure we address them. And those of you that need to get off at the end of the hour, again, this will be recorded, so you don't have to miss anything. Topic 3, next question. Topic 3 asks for cross-divisional and cross-directorate collaboration. Is it expected that PSD, the Planetary Science Division, would support this science, or will concomitant funding from other areas of NASA be allocated? That's a really good question. And I would say that, for one thing, this document will not prescribe how any money is going to be spent. But those decisions will, of course, be made in the coming decades through a variety of processes, and a document like this can be influential on that. I mean, that's the idea, is to make a compelling case, right, for our priorities and our the research and other activities that we as a community, think are most important and should be supported. So, as I indicated, there's more and more interest at NASA in expanding astrobiology research beyond PSD. And while currently most, but not all, astrobiology research is supported by the Planetary Science Division, there are important pockets in astrophysics with exoplanets, in heliophysics with some programs involving loss of habitability due to atmospheric escape, and earth science due to ocean worlds. There already is support from other divisions, but if the concern is that, well, we're talking about more mouths eating at the same pie, I get that concern, but another way to think about it is that we are developing a rationale for increasing the size of the pie. And certainly, if there's going to be more involvement by other divisions beyond Planetary Science Division in astrobiology, then it will not make sense for Planetary Science to support all of that research going forward. And I think there's wide acceptance of that. And one thing I'll mention is that before Rachel and I put out this RFI with this plan, we had to sit in a room. We had to, but it was a great opportunity, sit in a room with the leadership from all across from every division at NASA, astrophysics, earth science, et cetera. And they all signed off on this process. So they're all very aware that we're doing this. And it's obvious that we can't just say, hey, we're going to do all this work that belongs in other divisions, but Planetary is going to pay for it. That won't be how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you covered that really comprehensively, David. And I think that there are a couple of other questions that are somewhat related to that. And so I just want to make sure we give time for them. So there have been a couple of questions about where does origins of life wrap into this. And I just want to clarify maybe a misconception. Origins of life is absolutely still relevant to astrobiology at NASA and NASA dares. We imagine, because astrobiology and the origin of life have been topics that have, been very much at the forefront of astrobiology research at NASA in the last couple of decades. Any RFI response that's relevant to that is, relevant to a number of topics from, reviewing recent advancements, cross-director collaboration, emerging research themes and topics. So just want to assuage everyone, you're not overlooked. You're very much baked into, the existing framework. So we haven't forgotten about you, and you're very important. So don't worry about that. Let's see. I guess perhaps also a related question, to what we just discussed, David, was several topics such as 1, 4, 5, 6, and 8 appear to be out of scope for the science community's input, but should be directed or at least compiled by HQ leadership. I think that we've, addressed this pretty comprehensively of like how we're taking, this to the next step of trying to really forge concrete bridges across divisions and directorates at NASA with the Astrobiology Federation, how we've received concurrence across these divisions with the Science Management Council. And so, these topics would not be presented to you, the public, if they were not approved as being within scope by NASA leadership. And, even if you in your own individual field might feel like there are some topics that are out of scope to your research, we can assure you there are astrobiology adjacent communities that do conduct this research or do work relevant to these topics that, will be able to contribute responses to them. And so we want to be able to make sure that we're lifting those communities up to be on par with, communities that might have received perhaps more focused attention in the last decade. So rest assured, the community is able to provide input on it, and you will have guidance and feedback from the leadership at NASA through the Astrobiology Federation to make sure that recommendations stay in scope. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's 2:00, but I think we can go for another 15 minutes, let's say, because these are good questions, and I think this is really valuable. There's a long question here that I don't have to read all the way through. In fact, it looks like somebody already wrote a white paper and submitted as a question. But I think I can summarize what I think is the core of the question, which is, what about societal applications and aspects of astrobiology that go beyond science? And it's a good question. And mentioned in here is the Kluge Center at the Library of Congress and this partnership that NASA has supporting not just the chair of astrobiology at the library, but other activities there. And that currently is the main way that NASA is supporting work in the humanities and the social sciences that are obviously relevant to astrobiology. You know, huge questions of philosophy and other areas that we all recognize are really important to these deep questions that astrobiology addresses. So one answer is that we're going to continue that partnership with the Library of Congress. It's been very successful. It's continuing on. And by the way, applications are open right now for the next chair of astrobiology position. And I can testify from personal experience. It's a really great program, a great experience. So think about applying now or some year in the future if you want to pursue this kind of research. As far as other ways that NASA might support, social science research or other relevant research, it's an interesting question, and it's fair game for a white paper. It certainly fits into a couple of our topic areas. Developing the community and thinking about preparing for the discovery of life. There's a lot of areas that it touches on, and so if you're interested in that, I think it's a great topic to submit a white paper. It leads to some tricky questions. If we support more of that, maybe we need to support a little bit less science, which, so it's not, there's some tough calls, but it's definitely worth your making the case and our including that in this. The next question I also want to address, why is DARES necessary given fewer funding opportunities, fewer ROSES programs, fewer NASA missions, et cetera? Couple quick responses. One, I would question the premise of the question. There's no doubt that we're in tough budgetary times right now, but over the last decade or two, the story of our RNA support is actually quite healthy and is one of expansion. Now, we have not contracted. Even in these tough times, we're protecting the research budget, and there are not really fewer ROSES opportunities. We've done some recent consolidation. There was a lot of confusion about the boundary between exoplanets and habitable worlds, so we've somewhat consolidated programs, but that does not include any reduction in funding for those programs, and that's a little bit beyond the scope of this, but there's been a lot of information put out on that recently by our program scientists, and it's certainly something you can get in touch with us about if you're unclear about. But I don't think that it's true that there's some huge reduction in research opportunities going on right now. And as far as missions, that's cyclical, and it's always a bit of a struggle, and it has been for a long time. But we just launched Clipper. We're on our way to an ocean world. We have active rovers at Mars. We're struggling to see if we can find the best way to return samples, but our Mars program is really happening. We just returned samples from Bennu, asteroid Bennu. We have Dragonfly confirmed. We're going to Titan. So the picture is it's always challenging. There's always more we wish we could do, but it's not dismal. And there's a lot of important science to do to support all these missions and important advocacy for future missions to be done. And another way I would even just quickly before we move on say you could turn this question around, because if the premise of that question was true, I would say that makes NASA DARES even more important. You can say, given fewer funding opportunities, et cetera, this is why we need something like NASA DARES, because if we, to the extent we are in budget challenged times, then we have to make a compelling case for our highest priority science. So we make the right choices with whatever resources we have. And we don't know what resources we're going to have in the next decade, but to the extent we can make a compelling strategy that helps us argue that it's worth doing the science we feel is worth supporting. Okay, enough soapbox. Next question. Rachel, what should we tackle?
So, will there be efforts to include astrobiology in academic curricula in colleges and universities? So I think that this is relevant to astrobiology 100%. The roadmap in 2008 and the astrobiology strategy in 2015, very much emphasized the importance of public engagement. And the same message is very much true here. We have a whole, communications team and early career team in the astrobiology program that are very much dedicated to, communicating astrobiology science, in schools, in under-supported communities. We have the tribal programs as well. So, in terms of specific recommendations for colleges and universities, that is, that's not really NASA specific, but that's something that we're hoping that, there are many resources already online on the astrobiology strategy that are available for K-12 and college faculty as well. So it's very much in our very significant relevance, I'll say, but perhaps a little bit outside the scope of planning directly at NASA for research and exploration.
Okay. Now that we're sending spacecraft to Europa, which has subsurface liquid water, should we redefine the habitable zone? One way to answer that is if you're defining habitable zone in a way that excludes Europa, then yes, you should redefine it. But really people define habitable zones in different ways, and you can qualify it and say, we're talking about the heliocentric surface water habitable zone, and then you don't have to include Europa. So it's a matter of precise language. I don't think it's a major issue for our strategy. Let's see. Next question. I think we kind of addressed, specifically as a graduate in biotechnology, how can I contribute? Again, this is not strictly a question about our RFI or about the strategy, but there are definitely ways to get involved in astrobiology as a graduate in biotechnology. I would say the first one place you could go is the Astrobiology program website for NASA, which has some description of the breadth of the field. And yes, we could use you. Will there be a town hall or other opportunity at upcoming science meetings like AGU to discuss brainstorm before the February deadline? That's a really good idea. Rachel and I discussed this briefly right before we got on air because we just saw that question come in, and we both said that might be a good idea. We don't have anything specific like that planned at AGU. It might be tricky because it's hard to get a room at AGU at this short notice, but I think we agree it's a good idea to talk about doing something like that and think about how we would organize it. So maybe we can do that. Whoever wrote this question, if you're interested in helping organize such a thing or have specific ideas, don't hesitate to use that email address on the slide here and get in touch, and let's talk about it. I noticed that Astrobiology Federation appears to be 100% HQ people. We know that HQ doesn't care much about what the workforce at centers thinks about anything. Wow. But I would have guessed that you would have at least included a couple of center scientists for optics. Don't you think you might want to tap into a more representative spectrum of NASA's astrobiology expertise? Yeah, that's I'm not sure I would agree that we don't care about the workforce at centers, what they think about anything. I personally care. There were pragmatic reasons why the initial composition was mostly headquarters people, not all. We have, I think, at least one Ames scientist on there. But the idea wasn't this is going to be a representative body that's going to be deliberative and make important decisions that rule over the astrobiology universe. This is largely just making sure that people at headquarters from the different divisions are represented in an exercise like this. And in fact, the initial makeup of the Federation was largely driven by the division directors at headquarters, where I asked each division director, astrophysics, earth science, et cetera. Who would you like to have represent your group on this? And for sort of expediency, there was kind of initial pulling together of a lot of the program officers who have been involved in some of our existing interdisciplinary projects, such as Nexus or some such as the exoplanet research program and so forth. But I think it's a legit question, and I think that if there's concern that there's neglect of center science because of the Federation not including those people, then I'm totally open to that to that suggestion, and that's just the initial composition, and so I think it is something we can talk about.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on that really quickly, David. I think that you pretty comprehensively discussed kind of the logistics. The program officers at NASA that oversee the research portfolios are very well acquainted with the research community. They see every single proposal that goes through. They're the ones who check for relevance. And so they are very much tied into the pulse of the community. That being said, the Astrology Federation at headquarters is serving in the capacity of an advisory council to make sure that the bureaucratic end of this strategy remains compliant. And so don't think of it as, expertise in astrobiology is not being represented there. That expertise will be represented in our task forces. And so, and you will be communicating and liaising with the Federation to make sure that your expertise is reflected in the new document. So, but again, that being said, this is a new endeavor at NASA. We're trying something new. And we'll see where it goes. And so it may very well be that we expand the Federation, but this is where we are to start. I just want to be mindful of the time. It's 13 past the hour. I'm sorry we didn't get to go through and answer every single question that was submitted today, but we want to rest assured to everyone, we're going to be typing up our responses to these questions and posting them online on the RFI webpage on Inspires as a frequently asked questions document. You're also very much welcome to send questions to us via the questions or comments email account that's listed at the bottom of the slide. Feel free to reach out and keep asking questions. David and I will both be at AGU and we'll be walking around and engaging with you. So please feel free to reach out. And thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate your engagement today.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. And we look forward to your continued questions and suggestions and to your input into NASA DARES as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.